everyone, welcome. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar, Meeting People Where They Are and Resources that Support Safety, Healing, and Empowerment. This is the fourth webinar in our 5-part series based on the guide, Committed to Safety for All Survivors. And today's webinar is hosted by the National Center on Domestic Violence, Trauma, and Mental Health. My name is Gabriela Zapata Alma, and I'm the Director of Policy and Practice on Domestic Violence and Substance Use with the National Center, and I'll be today's presenter. So before we get started, I just want to go over some technical details of the WebEx software that we'll be using for today's webinar. Many of these details are explained on the, quote, using this webinar system, end quote, tab in the center of your screen. You can switch to the screen from the slides by clicking the down arrow next to where it says using this webinar. Please be aware that your screen might look a little different depending on whether you're using a Mac or a PC. On the right-hand side of the screen, there are multiple boxes. Third from the bottom is the chat feature. You may have to click on the chat cloud icon at the bottom center of your screen to open your chat box. This feature will allow you to provide feedback and share resources with your colleagues, as well as to get in contact with the trainers or myself if you have any questions regarding the training content. You can also contact Carla Alegria, also with the center, if you have questions about troubleshooting the WebEx software. In order to do this, click the down-facing arrow and select the person you would like to contact. You'll see a lot of options. But for this session, you'll want to select all participants if you would like to respond to a question from the trainer or to contact the center staff at any time during the session. You can also click on Carla Alegria to privately contact her if you're in need of troubleshooting the WebEx software. So let's go ahead and test this chat feature. Well, everyone, please go to the chat box, click on all participants, and type in where you're calling from and then press enter. This is so great. I'm seeing folks from Tennessee, Florida, Ohio, New Mexico, Nebraska, North Carolina, New York, Minnesota. Welcome, welcome, welcome. We are so happy to have you here. And go ahead and keep sharing in the chat. So while folks can get a lot out of the chat feature, there are times when it moves really quickly and can feel distracting. If this is true for you, feel free to minimize the chat box by clicking the arrow next to where it says chat. You can always open it again with the same arrow if you choose. We will be providing live captioning during this webinar. Below the chat box, there's a media viewer box. This will contain the captions. If at any point you do not want to see the captions, you can click on the down-facing arrow next to the word Media Viewer, the same way that you would if you want to hide the chat box. We've planned some time at the end for questions and answers. At the same time, feel free to, put any kinds of questions in the comment box, and I'll do my best to keep an eye on those. And if you get disconnected at any point, return to the email you received with the original webinar link and re-enter the training. Also, sometimes the sound can cut in and out because of the internet connection. So feel free to call in if the sound quality becomes a problem at any time. And if you're experiencing technical difficulties and are unable to contact Carla Alegria, you may call WebEx Tech Support to resolve any problems. That phone number, which Carla will also post in the chat, is 1-866-229-3239. And again, thank you for joining us today. I also want to take a moment and share with everyone that the National Center is located in Chicago, and so that is where we are hosting today's webinar from. And we also recognize the Indigenous people as the long-standing inhabitants and caretakers of this land. So for those who don't already know, Chicago is part of the traditional homelands of the Council of the Three Fires, the Ottawa, the Ojibwe, and the Potawatomi nations. Many other tribes such as the Miami, Ho Chunk, Sac, and Fox, also called this area home. We're located at the intersection of several great waterways, so the land naturally became a site of travel and healing for many tribes. Today, Chicago is still a place that calls people from diverse backgrounds to live and gather. Native American people continue to live in the region, and Chicago is home to the country's third largest urban Native American community, who still practice their heritage and traditions, including care for the land and waterways. I want to invite everybody to share in the chat who are the original peoples of the land that you are on, and to also, if that's not something that maybe you already know offhand, then go ahead and take a moment and look that up and then share that with us. So there I am, that's me, and always feel free to reach out to me if you have any kinds of questions, any ways that, as you're applying the information, if you want to kind of troubleshoot anything, I'm available for technical assistance, so please feel free to reach out to me. And a little bit of information about our center. We are a FIPSA-funded special issue resource center dedicated to addressing the intersection of domestic violence, trauma, substance use, and mental health. And we offer an array of training and technical assistance services and resources. We conduct research and evaluation, policy development and analysis, and public awareness. And here is our grant information and also our government disclaimer. The things that I share do not necessarily reflect the official positions or policies of the Department of Health and Human Services. And at the center, this is our integrated framework. So everything we do is rooted in this foundation. This is where we start, and this is hopefully where we end as well. And so that everything is within survivor-defined approaches, that physical and emotional safety are core to healing, as are relationship and connection, as well as hope and resilience. And pieces making up our core, we then are able to come from that place, that empowerment and advocacy model, from trauma-informed approaches that are rooted in human rights and social justice, and that have an awareness of and responsiveness to cultural, historical, and community context. And so everything today is also found in this guide. So this guide is available for free download on our website, as well as all of the preceding webinars. They're found in our webinar library. So already webinars 1 through 3 are in our webinar library, and then in May, we'll have the 5th and final segment on this series. And I see the question of whether slides will be available. Yes, you will have access to these slides afterwards. So today, we're going to go over a framework for providing survivor-defined support that includes strategies for us to be able to better understand where people may be in relation to their substance use. So in order to meet people where they are, we have to be able to have a way to understand where someone might be. We're also going to offer some guidance on what kinds of approaches and resources could be helpful based on where people are in their journey. And then we're also going to share information on the internal and external resources that promote healing and recovery for people who are experiencing chaotic substance use. And then throughout all of this is a very interactive webinar. So I hope folks came ready to type in the chat and ask questions and share resources and ideas and experiences, because we will have different opportunities for advocates and programs to reflect on what resources are already available within your services, as well as to get ideas from other programs about how you could easily expand or what you could add on without, it taking a whole lot of resources. And Bethany, thank you for putting the Native Land website in the chat box. That is a great, great resource. Thank you so much for sharing that. So I want to start by inviting everyone to take a moment and think of a situation that involves substance use and feels particularly challenging in one of your programs. So not necessarily in your personal life or people that you know in your social network, but within the program where you offer services. And don't put anything in the chat yet, but just jot some notes to yourself privately about that situation so that you can keep it kind of fresh in your mind. And as we go through the information today, we'll have some different moments to reflect on that situation. And I'll give folks just 30 more seconds of reflection, but of course, feel free to continue jotting down some different thoughts as you reflect on that situation. All right, thanks so much, everyone. So first, we're going to start with a framework for meeting people where they are. And what you see here is known as the stages of change, but also known as the trans-theoretical model of change. And so some research done on substance use and people's relationship with substances has found that people tend to go through different phases as they make changes with their relationship to substances. So this is a model that can really help us understand where someone might be and how we can show up with that person to offer support and resources and potentially services that are much more likely to be helpful and to feel relevant for the person, rather than feeling, kind of othering or judgmental, which many times is the experience of survivors using substances because of how much stigma there is and because of how stigma related to substance use has been used as an abusive tactic. And for more information on that, be sure to check out our resources on substance use coercion. So at the same time, sometimes people have applied this model in order to try to understand where someone may be in leaving an abusive relationship. And so here at the center, we want to name that is not the way that we use this model, and we highly advise against using this model to apply it to people's relationships. That really a survivor is the only one who can know whether they want to leave, need to leave, can leave, and if so, when and how, right? And that we're here really just to be a support in whatever way that person defines support. So, so we highly advise against using this for relationships. That said, this can be a really helpful model for substance use. So I'm going to walk through this model using an example from actually my own life. And I'm going to use the example of when there was a time in my life that I would skip lunch almost every single workday. I don't know if anyone else has ever been there. Maybe you find yourself right now in that place of just feeling like there's not enough hours in the day, you don't have time to eat lunch, and so I'll speak from my own perspective. There was a time that I just felt like, oh gosh, I can't even take a moment I can't even take 10 minutes to stop and eat lunch, and I need to just run from here and run from there, and literally I'd be running through the hallway sometimes, like if there was a phone call or something, I'd be like running to get to it. So run from here, run from there, and that I just needed to be on all the time, go, 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 offering services and being with folks, and that I just kind of put myself to the side, might even say I put myself last, right? And said, I'll just eat at the end of the day, or if I have a spare moment, maybe I'll eat, but I'm just going to focus on what needs to get done. So I was in the pre-contemplation phase at that point. And I'm seeing some folks in the chat can relate to what I'm sharing. Thank you. I'm glad I'm not alone in that. And so I was in a pre-contemplation phase. I really didn't see why it would be any kind of problem to skip lunch. And if anything, I saw that it was something that helped me, right? Or something that I just kind of needed to do in order to really be there for folks. And then at some point, I started wondering, you know, would I be more present with people if I've eaten? Would I be able to focus better? Would I be more efficient in what I'm doing? When I'm putting together resources or trying to identify different resources, would I, you know, just kind of think more clearly if I was refueling and taking that moment just to kind of like be still, be in my body, be in my moment for that moment. So I was thinking about it. I was in the contemplation phase. Then through that contemplation phase, at some point, I made a decision. I said, you know what? I want to try to put lunch back in my day. I know it's not going to be easy. I know that there's a lot of different demands on my time, but I want to make this a goal. I want to try to figure out a way to work lunch back into my day. So I started planning, and I was in preparation. I started planning, you know, what do I need to do? Do I need to let folks know that I have this goal? Do I maybe need to let my coworkers know, you know what, I haven't been having time to eat lunch during the day. I'm going to try to put lunch back in my day. And so I'm going to block some time off on my schedule to eat lunch. But if you need me, I can still talk. I'll just be, you know, eating during that time. I also thought to myself, okay, do I need to buy certain foods? Do I need to maybe like make a big batch of food on a day off and then portion it out for the rest of the week? And then I also bought some different kind of like, you know, frozen meals that I could keep in the freezer at work, because I also knew that if for some reason I forgot my lunch at home, that I certainly wasn't going to spend the money on eating out, and I probably wouldn't even have the time to step out and grab something. So I had to think not only like a plan A, but also a plan B and a plan C. So from there, I then started moving into action, right? Putting that plan into action. And of course, so many times that I forgot my lunch at home. So maybe I had a lapse or a setback, or times where I felt like I got too busy, or there was a crisis, there was something going on, and so lunch happened maybe at, you know, in the last hour of the day rather than towards the middle of the day. But then also over time, it stopped being something that took a whole lot of kind of forethought and foreplanning and energy, and it started being something that was just kind of like my new normal. And so I can say today, many, many years later, having lunch in my work day is much more of, I'm in a maintenance phase. It's much more just kind of like the way that my day is organized, the way I organize my day now. But that's not to say that there aren't still days sometimes where I do end up skipping lunch for one reason or another. You know, maybe I had just a little bit too much coffee that day and I'm just not feeling hungry and get wrapped up in work. And before I know it, kind of the end of the day is here, right? So be times where we can experience a lapse or a setback in that goal. And that doesn't mean that all is lost. It just means that maybe there was something that we didn't anticipate in our plan and that we need to kind of think about for a moment. And then, of course, we don't always necessarily kind of stay in this change process. There's also such a thing as permanent exit, where that new normal becomes so integrated into our just way of being, that it's no longer even kind of a thought. It's no longer even something that we are maintaining. It just is. So hopefully that's an example that folks can start to see where, you know, we kind of naturally go through these different phases as we approach different changes in our life. So this research was really groundbreaking. And when I say this research, I mean the research done by Prochaska, DiClemente, and Norcross was really groundbreaking because it found that progress towards our goals happens in stages, and that the services and resources we offer need to match where the person is. It's also found that it's pretty common to experience some setbacks as we move towards our goals, so that doesn't need to be a huge crisis. That doesn't need to be a big source of shame, that we can actually just kind of normalize that's part of the process of learning. And really, any area of our life where we're learning, we experience, you know, stumbles and mistakes and potentially setbacks, and we would never think that we somehow failed or that we somehow didn't want it enough. No, we can recognize readily that mistakes are actually a really necessary part of the learning process, and that they actually aid us in our journey rather than being kind of like a crisis. So here's just a summary slide of the stages of change. So this can be kind of a quick reference point if you're thinking about, okay, you know, where might this person be? Just a one-line summary of each stage. So I want you to take a moment and reflect back on that situation that you wrote down earlier. And we're going to go ahead and launch a poll where you can select what stage of change was that person most likely in at that time. And you'll have a little under a minute to respond. So take your time, you can think about the situation and then select which stage of change you think that person was likely in at that time of the situation. Yes, so here's a question. What if that person doesn't recognize the need to change? So that would be pre-contemplation. Not even thinking about change yet. We'll give folks just a few more seconds to get their responses in. All right. Thanks, everyone. So we're seeing here that the distribution really is heavily shifted towards pre-contemplation and contemplation, right? And that it's really a very, very small amount of people who may be in the creation or action or maintenance stage or lapse, of course. And so this poll actually matches up really well with what people found in the research. So what Prochaska, DiClemente, and Norcross found is that there tends to be in our services a focus on strategies that are more appropriate for someone who are in the action stage of change, while most people are not at that stage. So at any given time, only about 10 to 15% of people using substances are in an action stage of change, but the vast majority are in a contemplation or even more so a pre-contemplation stage of change. And that this mismatch between where our services are focused and what kinds of resources we have on hand, and that not being matched to where people are at, leads us to not only not really being able to offer relevant services for folks, but it also can lead to a lot of discord in our relationships with folks. Just think about how frustrating it can be when someone just isn't understanding where we're at. And even on top of that, if then someone is trying to get us understand their point of view, but they're not understanding ours, how coercive that can feel, especially for somebody who has already experienced coercion and power and control from a partner who has been potentially causing harm or exerting power and control over them, and just how that very quickly can be a reminder and a replication of the domestic violence that they've already been experiencing, right? So, so even when, we're working with, even when we are trying to support somebody who has never had any kind of trauma or domestic violence, it would still be important to meet them where they are, but especially in the context of that domestic violence and substance use coercion and potentially even trauma. So now, reflecting on the services and resources that your program offers regarding substance use. So resources that you have kind of in-house, as well as resources that you might refer to, which stage are they most focused on? And we'll go ahead and launch that next poll. And you have about a minute to respond. And we'll just give folks about 10 more seconds to respond, and then we'll see the results. All right. So we see here, the majority of our services do tend to focus on action. A lot of times this looks like having, referral resources to treatment providers or services that are really focused on having someone change something about their substance use, right? And that really on the kind of the lower end tend to be pre-contemplation and maintenance and lapse, of course, as well. So in pre-contemplation, a really common question I have is, how do I work with somebody when they don't see their substance use as a problem? And so right here, we can see how, of course, that's a really common question, because we don't typically design services for people who are in a pre-contemplation phase, despite the fact that the vast majority of folks that we meet will likely be in a pre-contemplation phase around their relationship with substance use. I also want to clarify one thing about pre-contemplation, is that it is possible that for the vast majority of people who use illicit substances and substances in general do not meet criteria for a diagnosable substance use disorder. And so, and if anyone's interested in kind of like the research around that, I'm really happy to share that. So there may be a lot of people who we meet who are using substances and don't see a problem with their substance use, and that may be absolutely 100% the case, that they aren't experiencing any problems related to their substance use, that their substance use is aligned with their other goals. And so we don't want to assume that just because somebody doesn't see a problem with their substance use, that they're in pre-contemplation. How many people may, if they are having a, let's say, 1 to 2 servings of alcohol with meals a week, right? So like having alcohol 1 to 2 times a week, and it's not causing any problems with their, work and relationships and health, right? That they wouldn't meet criteria for an alcohol use disorder, and we certainly wouldn't say that they were in pre-contemplation. So I also just wanted to clarify that piece as well. So in pre-contemplation, what might we notice, right? A person's not considering change. They may seem like they're unaware of any need for change. And if someone else talks to them about the need for change, they might feel really coerced or judged. At the same time, somebody may recognize some of the drawbacks and limitations that are related to their substance use, but they might feel really hopeless about doing anything about it. And so that would also be something that we might notice in a pre-contemplation phase. So when someone is in this phase, here are some things that, well, actually, let me back up. I'm getting ahead of myself. So for those that did say that most of our services are geared towards somebody in a pre-contemplation stage, as well as anyone else if something comes to mind, what are the services and resources in your program for somebody who may be in the pre-contemplation stage? How might you support them? Or what kinds of things might you offer? A hotline, general discussion on coping skills, supporting their coping, referral information. Yeah, so the question is the one that is here on the slide. So what kinds of services and resources are available in your program for people who are in the pre-contemplation phase? And how does staff advocate and offer support for survivors who may be in this stage? A listening ear through the hotline, virtual meetings, offering resources, harm reduction. Yes, harm reduction, absolutely. Education, information sharing, the space for them to talk and offering resources if it's needed, if they're interested, safety planning, using a non-judgmental approach. A harm reduction-based action plan based on their needs and wants, absolutely. Listening and empowerment. An on-site trauma-informed care specialist who can assist. Listening without judgment, helping people identify what might be some of those reminders for use or some cues for more chaotic use and supporting their coping. Case management support and resource advocacy. And asking them some questions. And I like the use of asking intentional questions, that it's not about, us satisfying our curiosity or us trying to persuade someone with the questions we ask. It's about asking questions that are thoughtful, that might be meaningful for that person. And motivational interviewing. Yes, and safety planning. Always, always safety planning. Thanks so much, everyone, and feel free to keep it coming. So here are some things that can be helpful for someone who seems to be in the pre-contemplation phase. And I want to be sure that as we're going through this framework, that we're still holding our perceptions lightly, that we're still aware that this is our perception of where someone might be, and that we need to be open to that we can be wrong, right? So always remaining open to the person in front of us, the person that we're with, and deeply listening to what they're sharing. So what can be helpful? Building relationship and engagement, just for relationship building, really, really focusing on building that safe, that trustworthy connection, right? Focusing on whatever they want to focus on. And sometimes it can feel like we're maybe like we need to focus on the substance use, when actually that tends to not be super helpful. At this phase, if we do have conversations about substance use, it can be helpful to keep them pretty informal, light, and wants to share with us. Because this is a place where, you know, if they sense that we have an agenda or that we're trying to kind of, that we have a kind of judgment, conversation really going to shut down even just that kind of reflection around what their goals are or what they would like their relationship with substance use to look like. Always helping with needed and desired resources, and we'll talk in this kind of second half around what those resources can be. And then we can sometimes just neutrally ask about what other people might be concerned about. And if we do kind of follow that line of just gentle curiosity and kind of neutrally asking, then we want to be sure that we're squarely on their side and that we're empathizing with their experience, right? So for example, if you know, someone were to share with us, you know, I was staying with my sister, but then she kicked me out and I don't have any, you know, I had to go back to this person. I didn't have anywhere else to stay. If we do ask, you know, oh, like what led to your sister telling you couldn't stay there anymore? And the person says like, oh, my sister didn't want me drinking there. For us, our response needs to be really empathetic. Our response needs to be something along the lines of, that's really harsh, right? Like, thank you for sharing this with me, and how did you get through that? And us. And I can imagine that felt like a really painful rejection, right? So it's really important to express empathy always, but especially at this point, and not to kind of take that as any kind of opportunity to try to persuade someone that they should change something about their substance use, right? So this is a place where we can very easily get caught in the trap of trying to convince or persuade someone that their substance use has some kind of risk or problem for them. And that is, as I said, a complete trap, and will really shut down any any relationship and any discussion. Something else that can be helpful here is self-exploration activities that help to draw out core values. So different kinds of art-based activities, different kinds of storytelling, as well as things like values card sorts can be things that we can make into kind of community building and games can be really helpful here, because our healing is naturally rooted within our core values. So the more that we can be in contact with our core values and with that core sense of self, that really helps support that healing process. I also want to mention that in some ways, it can be a common expectation that people will expect us to potentially be judgmental about their substance use. And that is because of all the ways that they have experienced stigma and judgment in every other area of their life, surrounding their substance use, surrounding potentially their relationship, either the most current or previous relationships, and then, you know, so many other stigmatized experiences and marginalized experiences and identities. So our services need to be really the complete opposite of that if we want to offer any kind of healing environment. And so this is where it can be really helpful to say out loud our unconditional support for their self-determination, for them, the only one who knows what is best for them being the only one who can make these decisions, right? And there are times that I have literally said to people, I'm not here to take your drugs away. You're in control, you get to decide. My goal is to work together so we can all be as safe as possible, right? So sometimes just really naming that. Something else that can be really helpful here is understanding that people have valid reasons for continuing to use substances, including ways that substances may have helped them to cope, right, with the effects of trauma, as well as how stopping danger if they're experiencing substance use coercion. And it's very likely that they either have recently experienced substance use coercion or are continuing to experience that kind of abuse. And so this is where, you know, if we built that trustworthy relationship with somebody, we can just even neutrally ask them, you know, what do substances help them with? People already know all of the, you know, hardship that comes with substance use, right? People can already tell us all of the hardship that comes with substance use. They don't need to get that from us. That just comes across as judgmental. So what could be helpful is talking about what has substances helped them with, and that might help them feel more heard and understood by us, and at the same time can help us just have deeper empathy and a deeper understanding of what kinds of resources and services they might find helpful. Of course, keeping in mind that they're the only ones who can really tell us what could truly be helpful as well as safe for them in that moment. And so I saw some folks mention harm reduction in the chat. And I have something to say, which is that anyone doing advocacy is already a harm reductionist. We are doing harm reduction day in, day out. So actually, advocates already have the skill set needed to practice harm reduction around substance use. We just need to really focus on uprooting the stigma that exists, because stigma is so widespread about substance use. It exists in all of our services. It exists in all of our programs. So we just need to focus on uprooting that stigma from within ourselves, within our services, within our policies, and within our programs, and then apply all of those amazing, nuanced safety planning methods to substance use, approaching substance use as any other relationship that may contain risk or harm. And so we already partner with survivors to support their safety and well-being. We already suspend judgment and manage our own fear, someone's safety. And so it really just, it's really just about taking kind of everything we stand for and everything we already do and just broadening it to substance use. And this is especially important because of the ways that substances are used as part of substance use coercion in a pattern of power and control. So in a contemplation stage, so let me say one more thing about harm reduction, is that if you're unaware of different kinds of harm reduction strategies and ways to minimize or mitigate the risks related to substance use, there are some great resources in the guide, and we'll be going much more deeper into that specific topic in our 5th webinar in the series in May. So please tune in for that one for more information, as well as check out the guide for resources and links on harm reduction as it applies to substance use, as well as check out harm reduction organizations. Make them, one of your referral resources. Partner together, collaborate. That when we are able to, actively connect folks who are interested in harm reduction resources to those resources in our communities, that is expanding what we offer for folks who are in a pre-contemplation phase. At the same time, harm reduction is always important across every stage. So it's not just something that becomes relevant in this stage. So in contemplation, here we're starting to see there's a growing awareness that change may be helpful. Folks might seem like they're open to considering change, but still feeling pretty uncertain. And folks can feel pretty caught between the pros and cons of change. So it's common for people to feel somewhat stuck in whether they should make some kind of change or not. Something to notice here is that people can be in contemplation for a really long time. So using an example from my own life, I smoked tobacco for about 10 years, and 5 of those years were in pre-contemplation, and 5 of those years were in contemplation. So it was actually once I made the decision, the preparation, that for me, it ended up going somewhat quickly after that. That's not the case for everyone, right? A lot of people spend a lot longer time in action phases and preparation phases, but that said, people can stay in contemplation for a long time, maybe even years, right? And so this is where it's really important for us not to try to tug someone into resolving this ambivalence, but I'm getting ahead of myself again. I'll talk about in a moment what is helpful if someone is in this phase. But first, I want to hear from y'all. Have you ever worked really hard to find an opening in a treatment program, and then the person changed their mind or didn't attend the intake appointment? Yes, all the time. Yes, right? So I'm glad I'm not alone in that. And as we can see, this is a really common experience. So when we see that this happens, of course it's natural to potentially feel our own frustration around it because we're human, right? Like, newsflash, we're all human. At the same time, it's really helpful to reframe it and say, you know what, this isn't about that person, having done something wrong. This is actually about that person was in the contemplation phase, and I got so excited about that I got a little ahead of the process and went right to preparation and action. That's what that is. Right? And whenever we're ahead of the person in their process, that naturally drives them to kind of stay in an earlier stage of change. So this is how it's unfolded for me in my experiences. Is someone starts mentioning, I think I want to go to treatment, or I think treatment would be helpful, or, I'm so tired of I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired. I really need treatment, right? And I'm like, yes, the person needs treatment. Finally, here we go. We're going to make it happen, right? And I work because treatment is not an easy resource to access. Work to get access to that treatment, and then it didn't pan out, right? Person didn't attend, or they changed their mind. So when that comes up, it's really helpful time for us to notice that kind of where the person might be in their process, and instead of rushing to action, to respond with gentle curiosity and to respond with active listening. So for example, if someone says they're thinking about going to treatment, we could ask them, what about treatment seems like it would be helpful right now? And this is where that reflective listening, that active listening, getting their sense of what would be helpful, all that helps really kind of tip them into really solidifying that decision and then truly moving into a preparation phase, right? So in contemplation, what can be helpful? Approaching with that genuine interest and gentle curiosity, supporting their skill building. Again, this is always important, but especially in contemplation, this kind of comes front and center. Supporting their self-efficacy. So here, it can be really helpful to generate a lot of so that we can build momentum for those bigger wins, right? So affirming any positive change as they define it can be really helpful here. And then highlighting self-determination and freedom of choice. That, really making it clear that this is a decision that is up to them, only they can make, that no one is going to try to force them in one way or another, that this is truly, they're the author of their existence, this is a decision for them to make. And then when people are weighing those different choices, to remain neutral, or maybe even weigh in on the side of no change, right? And I would say that that is maybe like a next level move, like don't try that unless you have gotten more comfortable with this framework. So weighing in on the side of no change would sound like, well, I know you've been a treatment before and that treatment is hard. What do you think would be different this time? That's a weighing in on the side of no change. But like I said, that's kind of like a next level move. So don't start with that kind of response. That's really when you're much more comfortable using these different kinds of strategies and meeting people where they are. One thing I'll mention here is that sometimes people have been told that making a pro-cons list is helpful. And what the research has actually found is that a pro-cons list during the contemplation stage actually keeps people really stuck in contemplation because they're already really aware of all the benefits and drawbacks and are already having a hard time kind of making a decision because they feel so stuck between the two different kinds of extremes, or the pros and the cons. So a pro and con list is actually much more helpful in the preparation stage. Once somebody has already made a decision to change, and then now they're looking at how they're going to go about it. And so when we do a pro-cons list in the preparation stage, it helps us understand what are some of the resources people might need, what are some of the barriers they might experience, and because people have already decided to make that change, it actually tends to have more of a, like it solidifies their decision, whereas if it's done in the contemplation phase, it just makes people feel like, I'm so stuck between these two alternatives or multiple choices, right? Hopefully we have more than two different choices, but I just feel so stuck between all these different options. So in the preparation stage, someone has decided, they're exploring their options, they may even start experimenting with some different solutions and seeking support or resources for that change. And we may even see some of those initial steps towards change, some of those early steps. So an example of an early step is someone might kind of make a phone call to figure out if a provider has openings, for example, or someone might get a list of recovery support meetings, right? So those are some of those initial steps that you might start seeing. So some things that can be helpful: brainstorm, develop that buffet of options, and then support creating those strengths-based action plans using SMART goals. And then, help people anticipate, how will we know if the plan is working? How will we know if maybe, it's not working or the way we'd hoped, or, we're kind of headed down the wrong direction and we need to recalibrate here? We can help by addressing some of those resource needs and barriers. So this is a time where those active service connections really come to the forefront, although we're always helping folks access resources, of course. And this is also a time that it can be especially helpful to expand and activate that support, that supportive social network, and continuing to strengthen self-efficacy. Something to keep in mind is that because our society tends to talk about substance use as an all or nothing thing, a lot of times people's initial plans might kind of be in that all or nothing thinking, and that we want to help people really move beyond that all or nothing and think about a range of options. So for example, someone might think that the only way to pursue changes to their substance use is to attend formal treatment. And so while formal treatment can be really helpful, there are actually a lot of different kinds of tools and supports that people benefit from in their path of healing and recovery. So we want to, actually the vast majority of people who recover do so without ever attending formal treatment. Now, that's not to say that treatment isn't an important resource. It absolutely is, and people need to be able to have timely and safe access to treatment resources when and if they find that that's something that's needed. But also keeping in mind that we really want to break out of this all or nothing thinking. And a reason for that is because what's been found in the research is that when people approach changes to substance use as all or nothing, they tend to experience much higher rates of returning to chaotic substance use, much higher rates of setbacks, and setbacks that are much more kind of severe and longer. And so part of the reason is because if we're approaching things from an all or nothing perspective, then the moment that I experience a setback, it's very easy to enter into kind of a sense of shame and guilt around that. And then that shame and that guilt is really going to drive that chaotic substance use. Here, it's also going to be important to help people figure out what are the right size steps as they move towards their goals. Because steps that are too small can make us feel like we're not really making any progress, like we're not really doing anything. And steps that are too big can really set us up for failure, make us feel like make us feel really hopeless. So, in addition to attending treatment, what are some different ways that people might approach their recovery? I see Emily already wrote, supporting moderation of substance use. Absolutely. What are some other ways that people might approach their recovery other than attending treatment? Building a support system, safer use, religious experiences, yes, absolutely. Support groups and meetups. Learning healthy coping skills, engaging in healthy outdoor activities and creative activities, self-help books, distance from friends, so maybe curating one's social supports, meditation, exercise, working with a sponsor, mindfulness and yoga. We see a lot of responses around connecting with a support system, being more active, grounding and being present. Absolutely. Thanks, everyone, and keep it coming. Yes, and there are apps. Absolutely. Absolutely. Employment. So here, it becomes really important for us to embrace many pathways, that there is no one size fits all, right? And that we want to be developing that buffet of options, buffet of resources. We want to be sharing information around all the different ways that people engage in their healing and recovery. And that recovery doesn't just mean sobriety. recovery doesn't just mean abstaining from all substances, as folks have been mentioning. I also want to take a moment and say that while I use the word recovery very often in today's session, recovery is not even necessarily how somebody may describe their experience. Recovery may not be culturally resonant for somebody. And so for some folks that I've, had the honor to meet, they've described their experience as healing. For some folks, it's been just, finding and creating stability in their lives. Other folks I've worked with have described it as a process of getting healthy, whereas somebody else might find, the idea of getting healthy as potentially judgmental, right? And so this is where it becomes really important to tune into the language that whoever we're talking with is using and what that means to them, right? That recovery might mean something to them that is different from what maybe we're considering. And that we really want to be able to connect with folks and how they understand their experiences and how they define their goals. So as you see these up here, are there any that folks are like, well, what in the world is that? Feel free to put in the chat, and we have time for me to explain maybe like one or two. Quantum, yes. So quantum recovery, we know that it exists. We don't know what the path to quantum recovery looks like. So it's not something that someone at this point could necessarily engage on purpose. But quantum recovery is characterized by kind of an all of a sudden resolution of the substance use concern that is typically characterized by of highly impactful. Sometimes people even name it as a spiritual experience. So this idea, for example, one of the founders of 12-step traditions described his recovery experience as seeing a bright light and having a spiritual experience that then resolved his alcohol use concern. That actually falls more into a quantum kind of recovery experience. So it happens kind of all at once, all of a sudden, sometimes out of nowhere. And not only is there a change in the person's relationship to substances, but there's often a deep reorganization of their core values as well. So that core values also kind of shift dramatically after an experience. Thanks, folks. And here, keeping in mind the cultural pieces. So research has shown that people tend to engage at least 2 different pathways of recovery, often 3 or more. And that the ways that, the different pathways that they choose and that they engage are largely shaped by culture and by social context. So all the more reason to make sure that we are not, forcing any kind of definition of a solution, that we are really, really using survivor-defined and culturally responsive approaches, because there are a lot of reasons, including our culture, our social identities, that would influence why certain pathways of recovery would be meaningful for us, whereas others would not be meaningful or effective. And then peer support, keeping in mind that many people find that engaging in some kind of peer recovery support is helpful. And so there are a lot of different options. There are many that are, based on affinity, so are based on potentially gender identity or LGBTQ identity or race, ethnicity, and culture. Like, for example, Wellbriety circles are culturally specific for Native American tribes and communities. And then there's also differences in whether they're going to be abstinence-only based or whether they're going to also include moderation or harm reduction. One thing to note here is that our role is never to, we want to be sure that if someone chooses to use one of these resources, that it's always freely chosen. It's never something that, is guided or led by a service provider, but that it's freely chosen by the person themselves, that these kinds of support, they work because they are freely chosen. And some other things to keep in mind is that survivors can certainly experience some unique threats to safety when trying to access these different resources. So we want to be sure that if somebody is interested in accessing these, that we're also including it in safety planning, and we're talking with them about any potential risks that they may encounter, whether they have any concerns about risk for being stalked, or sometimes they're, newer members in a group might, a more senior member may try to exert some power and control over a newer member. So being aware of that and having support, as well as there can be some times where a tradition might not be super trauma informed or DV informed. And so we can also support survivors by helping them, if they want to engage that tradition, helping them to kind of translate it into their DV experience. So for example, if, sometimes in certain traditions, there can be like a slogan about insanity, that, insanity is doing the same thing and expecting different results, or doing the same thing over and over again. And that's a slogan that could potentially be harmful for a survivor because of all of the gaslighting that is so common in domestic violence and substance abuse coercion. Or if there's a tradition where someone needs to make amends to those they've harmed, being really clear that someone who has harmed them is not somebody that they need to make amends to, right? That, and so making that really clear, right? And so there are some different resources. We have Real Tools by Patty Bland and Debbie Edmond on our website that has a whole piece on this, as well as there's A Woman's Way to the 12 Steps by Stephanie Covington, which is much more gender responsive and trauma informed if somebody wants to use 12 steps. And then there's so many other options as well. One thing I'll mention about Smart Recovery is that it doesn't need to be run by someone who is necessarily has a lived experience of substance use. And so if in your program you want to offer some kind of recovery support group in-house, you can actually get trained through the internet. There is a one-time cost associated with it. You can get trained to facilitate Smart Recovery peer support groups and then offer that in-house. And we've heard from a lot of different residential programs that that's been a good resource. And then I'll point out one more, which is Soberistas, which is actually a global women-specific recovery community that is virtual. So that might also be of interest for folks. And then in breaking beyond that all or nothing thinking, being able to think of also alternatives to quitting cold turkey. So there's moderating, reducing, managing use. There's maybe stopping one substance while continuing to use others. And then there's also warm turkey. So gradualism is when people just use like less and less and less over time until they get down to zero. And of course, that would be something that would be freely chosen by the individual for themselves, not something that a provider would kind of push or suggest. And then there's also times that someone might have kind of a planned period of abstinence, a planned period of, I just don't want to use this substance during this time. So there are some folks that decide, every January I'm going to stop using alcohol during that period of time. Actually has a name, I think it's like Dryuary or something like that. Just some things to keep in mind there, that if there are any opioids involved, that this can increase the risk of overdose, and we need to support people in planning accordingly to have an overdose prevention safety plan. Also to note that withdrawal from alcohol or benzodiazepines, so those are medications that are often used to treat anxiety, things like, Xanax and Ativan, Valium, things like that, that the withdrawal from these two has the potential to be life-threatening. And so if somebody does want to stop use for a period of time or stop use at all, we may want to talk with them about whether they want to talk with a substance use counselor to see whether medical withdrawal management services would be needed. Those are also sometimes called detox services. So how can we help people explore their options without taking over the conversation, right? Because nobody likes to be talked at. So here is a model for sharing conversation that still is conversational. It's called elicit, provide, elicit, and it actually comes from motivational interviewing. And so the first elicit is just finding out what somebody already knows about something. So finding out what their experience has been, what they think about something, what they already know about something. This is super helpful because it helps us, first of all, not share things with folks that they already know, right? Because we all tend to become passive listeners when we're being told things we already know. It also helps us get a sense of if there are any potential myths, right? If someone is saying like, well, there's just zero treatment in my area, and maybe we have made a relationship with a treatment provider, and so that's something that we can be aware of that then we can offer if they're interested, right? So getting a sense of what might be helpful for us to clarify potentially. And then it truly helps us build on what people already know and already value. From there, moving into the provide piece and doing this with permission. So unless someone has specifically asked us for either advice or a resource, we always want to be asking permission beforehand. So we want to say, would it be all right if I shared some information about, heroin with you, for example? And then the final elicit is getting their response. So what are their thoughts about that? How does that fit in with their experience? What else would be helpful to talk about or to know? And then also getting a sense as the conversation is kind of coming to a close on that piece, getting a sense of what will they do with that new information? How would they like to move forward? And then in action, people are actively taking steps towards their self-defined goals. And we typically know how to support folks once they're in this phase. We want to affirm them. We want to normalize any missteps. We want to make a plan that's responsive to the person, so adjusting that plan as that person experiences setbacks and or progress. We also want to be sure to make space to acknowledge losses and challenges that are a natural part of change. And then help people plan for situations that might be a heightened risk of setbacks. So I wanted to offer this example, and I'm like running out of time. Oh no. But this is a common situation that I've heard from a lot of programs, so I wanted to be sure to include it. So Monica recently shared with her advocate that she's feeling unsafe in the program because some people are using substances and she's scared she's going to start using again. She shares, I've been having some intense cravings and I'm just not sure what to do. So here, feel free to share kind of how you might support Monica, how you might respond. And then I'll also share some things that have been helpful, both in my experience and what I have learned from programs that I've spoken with as well. So here, we want to do our best to really support Monica, to find out from her what would be helpful, what would be supportive, what are some kind of extra supports that we can help her access. I see here in the chat, when you've had cravings in the past, what has been helpful in working through them? Absolutely. So really joining her and supporting her own solution making and affirming and celebrating her self-awareness, right? And so what I found a lot of the times in my own experience this came up a lot in kind of shared living environments, and I worked in housing programs for over a decade. And something that I found really helpful is that when people felt supported, when they felt plugged, like really connected with staff, connected with other residents, and then connected with external supports, potentially a sponsor or other external supports, friends and family members, that this was something that then they felt like they kind of had what they needed in order to be able to navigate it. And that with time, as they felt that support, what I found happened time and time again was then they felt like they were actually in a position to even reach out to folks that maybe were actively using to feel kind of comfortable forming relationships and feel comfortable saying like, hey, I'm in a different place, but if there's something that I could ever help you with, know that I can listen, right? Know that I'm here. And so something that a lot of times when these situations can come up, we can feel a sense of kind of panic or crisis. Like, oh no, it's not safe. Oh no, somebody who's, quote, doing well is going to experience a negative outcome, right? And it can be really natural to feel a sense of crisis around that. And so something that can be helpful in grounding ourselves again is understanding that we cannot ever build a reality that is completely free of reminders to use or reminders of craving. And what better place but in kind of the safety of our support to be able to have that safety net to really build those skills, right, within the safety of our support. And so it's not that we would ever dismiss or minimize this concern, but that this is actually the place, this is a safe place to put those supports in place to work on developing those skills, because we cannot just run from the things that remind us to use or things that maybe, kind of raise a craving experience inside of us. And so I remember working with a survivor who, through, offering our support and helping her to connect with her sponsor and her other kind of sponsee sibling, with time, she actually came to say to us, I'm really happy that people who are still using can be here because everyone needs a safe place to live, right? And that was really, I didn't expect that. I didn't expect that to happen. But that was really kind of eye-opening to me of what we can do to build a community of peer support within our programs when people feel supported by us and we help them to safely access any other social supports that they want to access. And then in the maintenance stage, here it's taking that, short-term action and making it into more of a long-term new normal. We're continuing to check in, affirming positive steps, and continuing to support just integration in the greater community can be really helpful, as well as focusing on all of those greater goals. And then if someone experiences a lapse or a setback, we want to really help attend to and neutralize any negative emotions, attend to any guilt, any shame, any disappointment, to normalize it, not always lost, to really recognize what they have achieved, recognize that they don't just suddenly lose the skills that they've developed along the way, and affirming their commitment, their ongoing commitment to their goal, even if it means that they're reworking their goal. And something I'll say is that when I was running treatment programs, those treatment programs that I ran were completely harm reduction based. And yet, the vast majority of people that we worked with did select some kind of abstinence goal. Maybe it was abstinence from one substance and moderated use from another substance. And what I've found time and time again is that people need the time and the space to experiment with different solutions, to find what works for them. And that if it is in fact true that abstinence is what is going to be more effective for them, right? That's not necessarily the case for everyone by any means, but if that is the case for them, the way that they are going to really arrive at that conclusion is by trying out different solutions themselves. And people have the right to do that, right? People don't lose their human rights just because they use substances. People have the right to try out different things, figure out what works, figure out what doesn't work. And our role is to be that ongoing support, an advocate for them. One thing with a lapse or a setback is that we want to really resist silver lining. So this is a delicate balance between expressing empathy and recognizing that not all is lost, expressing hope, while also not kind of invalidating the very real negative emotions they may be feeling and not just kind of silver lining the problem, right? So this is a delicate balance, and it takes us being really attuned to the person that we are with. And that everything that we've talked about today and in this whole series relies on community care and staff support. So community care, self-nurturing, reflective practice, supportive supervision, and team support, right? That we need all of these things in place in order to really cultivate this healing environment. So with minutes left, I'm going to go ahead and just talk real quickly about some of the resources that support safety, healing, and empowerment. And of course, go check out the guide. There's so much more there. So I want to introduce the concept of recovery capital. And this is the collection of internal and external supports and resources that a person can access that aids them in their journey of recovery. And so I want to invite folks to name in the chat, what are some ways that your program supports recovery capital? And this is where I want folks to be able to get ideas from one another, as well as have the experience of, hold on a second, we're actually doing a lot that supports recovery capital already. So first, the first domain is the physical domain. So our physical health, our safe housing and shelter, our access to our basic needs, and financial resources. And we know that this can be particularly important for survivors given the way that financial abuse is so often part of the picture, and that financial resources not only help us in our journey of recovery, but also help us in building safety. So feel free to put stuff in the chat as we go. And then there's the human domain. Our skills, our education, our self-efficacy, our sense of hopefulness, as well as our core personal values. So think about the ways that your program supports different parts of the human domain of recovery capital. And then the third out of 4 categories is the social domain. And this is positive connections and attachment with family, with safe, intimate relationships, with relationships of kinship, and with overall access to social support. And then last but not least is the domain of the community. And so here, having access to community that is anti-stigma, where there are visible recovery role models who are diverse, who we can see ourselves in, who we can feel a sense of shared experience with, and that have a diversity of multiple pathways of recovery, and that we also have access to peer-led services and peer-led support groups. So here it is all together, and think about, just all the ways that you're already supporting Recovery Capital. And this is why I say you don't have to talk about substance use in order to support somebody in having some stability around chaotic substance use. This is why. It's because actually so many of these other parts of our life that is what really helps us in our journey of recovery and healing. So here's just a summary slide with some of the key strategies we went over in this session. You'll have access to the slides, so I won't go over it now since we've gone over it all before. Something I will mention is that whenever I felt like what I was doing or the way that I was showing up with someone just wasn't connecting, that was a big, big sign for me, kind of big, bright red sign right in my face to say, Gabriella, hold on, slow down. Where is this person in stages of change? Because if I'm feeling a disconnect here, then I am not meeting them, right? And if it really seems like they're in contemplation, but I just don't feel like I'm connecting, like it's not I'm not meeting them where they are, then try going kind of to that earlier phase, right? See if maybe some of those strategies will be more relevant and helpful in meeting. So the next one in the series is in May, and we'll be talking about supporting survivor safety and choice within substance use. And stay tuned because coming soon, we will be launching an online resource hub dedicated to supporting survivors who use substances within residential settings. We'll have a whole lot of different resources and kind of real life information and examples there. And if you would like to be featured on our online resource hub, please, 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 please reach out to me. I would love to feature your program and have you talk about best practices. And then we have lots of resources on our website, different pieces on substance use coercion, on accessible, culturally responsive, and trauma-informed organizations, a whole lot more. Here's my contact info. Please feel free to reach out to me. I try to respond as quickly as possible. And I love to hear from folks, love to hear how you're using our materials, what are points that need clarifying, and then just what's really happening, in the day-to-day so that we can be as responsive as possible. And all of our resources are always free and to be shared widely. I want to say thank you, of course. Thank you not just for being here today, but for all the work that you do every day in the service of survivors and survivors' families. I have about a minute for question, answer, if anything has come up. So I'm going to go ahead and take a look at our Q&A, see if anything has come up. I apologize if I've missed your question. You already put it in. All right. Well, I'm not seeing any questions. I'm very sorry if I missed it, but I want to be sure to just have a little bit of wrap-up information as we end. So feel free to reach out to me if you did have a question or if one comes up, and I will be very, very happy to chat more. So with that, we are at the end of our session. I want to say thank you to Carla for making the webinar run smoothly. And last but not least, thank you all for spending your time with the center. In the next week, we'll send you all We'll send you a follow-up email with a link to the recording of today's webinar in addition to the slides and handouts referenced, all of which will be available on our website. You will also receive a certificate of attendance for your time today. At the end of the webinar, you'll be taken to a brief evaluation. If you could please take a moment to let us know what was useful and what could have been better, it would be greatly appreciated. Again, and we hope that you have a wonderful rest of your day.